So with Branded getting the top 32 at YCS Birmingham, with no Azamina, and with you guys seeing me not really run it either in my last deck profile for the new Blue Eyes format, I've gotten a lot of questions about why are we not running the Azamina stuff. And obviously, I think with Master Duel actually now getting Azamina, you could also run Azamina branded over here. So if you're also a fan of Master Duel, this will apply here. But overall, I think that there are big issues with Azamina into the current format. I don't think it's bad by any means. However, I think that when you're looking at the end boards that are being made between the ryzeal Mitsurugi boards, now we have Blue Eyes, of course, and then also Maliss, a lot of these boards are just extraordinarily layered at the moment, to where the Azamina engine doesn't really do a whole lot going second, even if you run the Soul. So currently, I think in TCG, you still have 3 wanted, which is really good. It makes this a draw engine, and honestly, at the end of the day, I wouldn't blame you if you ran this in a 60 card build, because wanted gives you a lot of good draws and thins out your deck. But at the end of the day, this does provide you with an Omni Negate. Now, you don't have to run the Muri Salago in the TCG. However, you do have to run in the Master Duel, so that's why I don't recommend it in Master Duel. I don't think it's good if you have to go into Mu and then to that. However, I think in TCG, we were running it in the prior format because it was really good into the more pure ryzeal board. I thought it wasn't as layered. So at the end of the day, when people aren't really running pure as much, at least here over in America, I've opted to drop the Azamina package. And then also, I would say, you know, I would rather have the space just overall for other cards, because this is still a sizable package, right? At minimum, it's 6 cards, and 3 of them are kind of basically bricks, right? So at the end of the day, while an Omni Negate is great, I don't think Azamina branded is going to be necessarily the play. I think, you know, when you're looking at Basili's list that got top 32, obviously it's not out right now, but I would say, you know, we've basically gotten all the text from it, because he was running things like, you know, I think with the extra deck now being so tight, because you have to run an Alba Lenatus, right? Because Alba Lenatus is your silver bullet versus the Blue Eyes deck. Obviously, we have the Blue Eyes White Dragon right here to symbolize it, but this card kind of just one-shots the whole board as long as they don't have the Blue Eyes trap in rotation. So when you're looking at what you want to be doing for this format, I think having a build that's about 50 to 60 cards is actually quite good right now, for the reasons that you need to be playing through these layered end boards. And so we're going to talk about what you need to be running, the cards that you kind of have to be running at the moment. I think first of all, Nadir Servant really needs to get its flowers for this format, because we saw Basili's run this in his top 32 list, and overall, I do think this card ends up being our best 1-card starter. At the end of the day, what other card ends up equating to Branded Fusion in Branded? There's only a couple cards in the deck that are 1-card Branded Fusions, essentially. Fusion Duplication's arguably one of them, but you need to have, obviously, already the Branded Fusion in rotation. These are the only 2 equivalents to a 1-card Branded Fusion right now. So overall, I do think that we should be running Nadir Servant because of that. Like, every deck is basically running 15 to like 21 hand traps on average, so having a option to just go last card Nadir Servant is one of the reasons why Branded was very good in the past with 3 Branded Fusion. You can go last card Branded Fusion after using your whole hand to play through the board, and then completely claw back all the advantage that you put into breaking the board, and then also win the game off of it. And that's why Branded Fusion probably had to go to 1, because it's very broken at multiples. You end up opening multiples, and then you can play through things like Omni Negates by just like straight up reusing it, or you could obviously do what I just said. And Nadir Servant definitely mimics that, so that's why I think this card's actually pretty good going second. A lot of people hate this card going second in Branded, because you do get locked, but like I said, for that reason where you can just dump your hand, I think game 1, this ends up actually being a pretty good thing. I've won games going second specifically because I had Nadir in my deck, and I was able to just break the board with the rest rest of the cards in my hand and do very well. Now, I think that's very much viable in a deck with draw power, and so we saw Basilis also, which I didn't notice at the time, but Basilis ran at least 2 Allura Darkness. I'm not sure if he ran 3. You know, I've seen Duelist branded players go back and forth between 2 and 3 Allure before. I personally think a 3 is usually the correct ratio, but this definitely can be a little bit of a brick sometimes at 3, where you only draw the lights, because you still run a lot of lights in your deck. You still have Cartesia, Quem, and things like that. So overall, I still think this is actually one of the better options that I did not have in my previous deck profile that I am now considering and running at the same time, because overall you can just up your Mercurier count to 2, which is great for the grind game, and then also you have the ability to also just sift through your 60 card build. I think that was my one, you know, reservation about my last list, besides the Quertus, but like which we're going to talk about Quertus, because I think that card, so you need it. But either way, I think Allura Darkness is something that you need for a 60 card build, or like Pot of Desires. I think Pot of Desires is currently unrunnable in branded. You know, rest in peace. I used to love that card. I used to love that card with 3 branded fusion, because you wouldn't have to, you know, banish the branded fusion essentially. But at the end of the day, when you have to dump your whole hand, and this card is going to have a high likelihood of, you know, banishing your only branded fusion. I think Pot of Desires ends up being a bigger liability than anything. And then also you have other draw power like Triple Tactics Talents. So I think like running Allura Darkness and Triple Tactics Talents plus the Nadir, because remember, Nadir is a draw with Garura at the end of the day. So I think that ends up helping go through your deck too. But I think having like just hard, like easy draw 2s is a very like good thing for 60, and you can end up having bricking issues elsewise. And I think like this just overall helps the consistency of your deck, especially when you aren't running hand traps or anything. I think Allure is quite good. Now, Droll and Lockbird is in the format. We must consider that. So I think that there are reasons not to run Allure. You know, I think Wanted kind of plays around that factor, and like I said, you can still get the draw off the Wanted package, but like I said, it's a 1 card extra deck commitment, which is actually just so crazy right now that that's too much of a commitment for the most part, because the branded extra deck is just so tight right now, with Blue Eyes now becoming in the meta. Overall, we can shelf the Azamina package. And now we're talking about more draw package. I'd say overall Talents and Allure over things like Desires. I think even though that Droll is an issue for this format, we can side out the Allures into the matchups where it's bad. And then for the matchups where we aren't going to just like lose to Droll, we could just use this to basically power through the boards with Engine, because I think this is the only way we are going to be able to like crack a Malice board with Engine and things like that. If we can go Allure, you know, bash a Mercurier, or at least get into board breakers that allow us to do that. So we run, you know, things from the Talents, and then also we can talk about other things like that, because you know, we should be running more board breaker centric build. Obviously, I don't think that Ash is quite the thing that we should be running. However, I do think things like Molcharmy Fuwalos will be definitely the play, but we'll talk about that. And once again, Nadir Servant ends up helping you get to 1 card combo. Nadir Servant sends Garura, you search out the Maximus, and then you can use Maximus to end up sending Albion. And traditionally Titanclad, you could also send Lulu while Lilith. Any combination of these 2 monsters will essentially get you to full combo, because Titanclad gets you to your Quem, which can get you access to Cartesia or Albaz. Lulu gets you your Quem or your Cartesia, and then also Albion is the one you definitely want, because Albion can set your best spells and traps to use on your opponent's turn to basically play the game, which you want to be doing in this. You know, traditionally your best targets are the branded in red. You also have branded Retribution. This is great against Malice even to set if you can. You know, there's certain luxuries where you can use things like Spriggan's Kit, because a lot of the time with only 1 branded fusion, you're going to be using your Shrouded Dragon in Retribution to be cycling your branded fusion to your hand, but you can use Kit to recycle your branded Retribution and bring that back to hand, so that you're able to set it, and then you can recycle your Albion and the Titanclad that you already sent. So it's a great way to just keep up your resource game, especially in a format where there's going to be a lot of grind games. So there's little things like that you just have to be highly aware of. you know, and that's just branded in a nutshell, just knowing the little technical plays. Like I was talking with my friend Yuri and watching him play against Mimigul, and they can't play the game if you summon so many monsters on your own board, and that's something you don't really know offhand, and like knowing how to swarm the board with branded is very good at the end of the day. So, you know, I do want to just remind people that branded, there's a lot of potential in the deck. You just have to be able to play it very technically well, and in a format with ryzeal and maliss, it's kind of tough, right? So I think, you know, overall you have to be running things like, you know, you could run the desires, but I don't think so. But I think like Nadir helps you generate a lot of advantage on top of Allura Darkness. I do think I've talked about the fact that High Spirits is not great with Allure. I've talked about that with Clifton Land on the branded cast before, where it's like if you run 3 of each, I think it's kind of neg, especially with the Nadir, because then you just start getting really starved for darks. But in a 60 card build with like 2 Mercurier, I think you can actually just run like 2 High Spirits and then 3 Allure, or 2 Allure, 3 High Spirits, whatever you want to do. But I do think you do need some sort of draw power. But like I mentioned before, you do have other draw power options in Triple Tactics Talents. You could frankly just run 3 of these guys, and then going second or even going first, it's still going to be a draw 2 a lot of the time if you open it, because you're going to be able to, you know, you get ashed on the branded fusion, you draw 2, right? And then you go thrust or something like that on top of something else. So I think that's a really good option. I think Talents is one of the best board breakers. It's just a game over, because if you have, you know, a fusion duplication when they've ashed you, and then you can go Talents hand rip, you basically win the game, right? Because you can see what they're on, you can see what their hand is, you can see what their board is going to look like, so you can use that to your advantage. And I think Talents just wins so many games right now. It creates so many non-games. When your opponent plays into Talents, they can lose the game really on the spot, or they're going to have to be afraid of playing around the Talents, and they're going to play suboptimally because of that, and that's what you want to see with branded. I also think things like Molcharmi Fuwalos is something that you should be able to consider with branded as we start transitioning into that board breaker kind of discussion, because I think we need to see draw power to get to that, to like the board breakers, this format. It's very much like the Fiendsmith Snake Eye format, where you just have to have draw power on some level to get to a hand state where you can break the board. And Fuwalos is great going second, because you are able to go second against things like Maliss and Mermal, which are your worst matchups. Like, let's just call a spade a spade. Those are your worst matchups as a branded player this format for the TCG. I think for Master Duel it's a slightly different, but obviously Fuwalos is also something that will help you go in those matchups, go second and have a good time, because Fuwalos, you know, if you use this in draw phase, you play around talent so you can't get hand ripped. Your opponent has to ash it, and if they don't ash it, then they obviously have to make a suboptimal board or give you multiple draws. If this card gets you a +1, it's worth it on the spot, obviously. And then also at the end of the day, you can use it on top deck and then still be able to like pitch it off if they have a IP Masquerena, so you can force them on that, or a Lacrima, so it's a decent top deck as well. I would say also having the fact that it is a winged beast, so things like branded and high spirits works really well with it. So that's why I really like 3 branded and high spirits right now. It's 2 or 3. I think you have to. This card's basically your in-engine Nadir servant, but it's a quick play, and it also can search out a lot of cards. This card's just really clutch, and it starts up your graveyard. It's also just one of your best ways to insulate your lines through hand traps, obviously, because as long as you have a branded or a Albaz plus a high spirits, you can or a dark dragon or a light dragon, you can go high spirits, dump it, get the kit effect, can end up getting the branded fusion, and then you can obviously send a Albion, so that if you get ashed on the branded fusion, you at least have the Albion plus whatever you set up in the graveyard, so that you can still play the game through the branded fusion being ashed. So that's why I think high spirits is like mandatory right now. I mean, but I think that things like Allure really should be experimented with, because this card is broken. This card's probably going to go to 1 because of Maliss, so we might as well use it while we got it. And I think having a card that can draw us into our most devastating board breakers is super crucial right now, because you have things like Forbidden Droplet, which helps you play around your really bad matchup into things like Forbidden Drop, or into Abyss Dweller. So Abyss Dweller is definitely one of your biggest enemies as a branded player, 60 card branded player, player, especially when you're running Nadir Servant, because if your opponent is like a ryzeal player, and a lot of ryzeal players are just like blind ending on Dweller right now on top of a ryzeal detonator, you'll have the droplet. So a lot of the time the ryzeal players are going to be ending on a board of detonator plus Dweller. No matter what the variant is, it's going to be going for that. And then on top of that, they can have things like, I'm just busting out my deck I cheat on you guys with, and then they'll have a ryzeal cross, right? So this is a really tough board for Branded to beat sometimes going second. So having things like Forbidden Droplet to clean this up is super useful, I think. So I think this is actually going to be mandatory, whether it's in our main or side deck. And this is once again a situation where Fuwalos will get you about 3 draws on this board, so that's pretty good overall, even into ryzeal. So if you do this against ryzeal, they either ash you or you have to basically make them have a suboptimal board. They might just end on this anyway, but if you draw, like if you have a starting hand of 8 to 9 cards as a Branded player, you're winning that game through Dweller no matter what, right? So I think when that's the case, I mean, most of the time, right? Like, especially depending on hand traps, but I think Branded does super well into card advantage. So having those options are really nice. I think Book of Eclipse used to be our best board breaker, but then also ryzeal ended up getting a few new toys in the form of the Eclipse, or the Eclipse twins, because those cards are, this card is just crazy essentially, because it will go underneath the detonator, and as long as there's another rank 4 in the graveyard, when the detonator goes to the graveyard, which it can pop itself when you go Book of Eclipse, they can chain the detonator, pop itself with the twin Eclipse, and as long as they have another rank 4 in the graveyard, detonator will trigger and attach the Eclipse twin, and then can on summon attach another, so you get 2 pops on the detonator, and you just wasted the Book of Eclipse, and it can get Ash Blossom. So that's why I think this card's actually kind of unplayable right now. When you consider, it's not unplayable, but you really have to not go against ryzeal and not go against Maliss, and those are the 2 best decks in the format for this card. Like Apo's out of the format, which is a good thing for this card. I think in Master Duel it's tough to run this card with Apo being in the game, because it obviously doesn't affect links, but then you obviously have the Maliss issue. So I think when that's a thing, also if you don't have the Mulcharmy, I think you can run the Droll Lockbird. I think you need to, if you're running hand traps and Branded, they have to be high impact, which is why I think Droll Lockbird would be actually just a totally fine substitution. I also would run the other Mulcharmies if you have the option to, because they're just so good at the end of the day. I say at the end of the day so much, sorry guys. So you have like Mulcharmy, purrely, and I think, as I've stated before and alluded to, I think that the Mulcharmy Meowls is really good too. So like, because Meowls is good if you top deck it too. It's really good if you top deck it against Malice. It's really good if you top deck it against Mitsu ryzeal, and it's pretty good if you top deck it against Fiendsmith ryzeal. So that makes it a pretty good card. I think it's better than purrely. So purrely would probably be the last Mulcharmy I'd main in Branded or side in Branded, but I think Fuwalos and Meowless are definitely should be staples in the side or the main of the deck. Obviously, I think you can't run too many hand traps in Branded, or else you have to change the whole build. You probably have to remove the thrust at that point. But if you're looking for a replacement, Drone Lockbird, I also think Gizmek Uka is a very good option. We have my friend Yuri Diaz also maining this engine for like the last month, and he just wins every locals he goes to with the deck. So Gizmek Uka is also a broken card, because you're able to, when your opponent summons from deck, trigger it from your hand. It's also a time card, because anytime your opponent's normals or special summons, you inflict basically 300 damage to them. And then the best part is, though, it can target a monster on the field and then summon a monster with the same attribute with equal attack and defense. The best option, obviously, is Incredible Ecclesia, because Incredible Ecclesia is 15/15, so you can summon it off of this when a Ice ryzeal, or another light, for instance, Primite Lordly Load, special summoning a Blue Eyes from deck. This card is very good into that, because you can trigger it and then summon the Ecclesia, and then Ecclesia can just go into Fallen of Albaz, and then Fallen of Albaz can discard a card, and then Fallen of Albaz can then make the Albion, or if your opponent has something like an extra deck card, at that point you can just go straight into the Mirror Jade, or just go Albion, banish the Albaz plus itself, and then make the Mirror Jade just straight up. So I think that's how you can make a turn 0 Mirror Jade on your opponent's turn, and also remove 2 cards. Remember, because the Gizmek Uka provides you a body, which is super good, I think, in my opinion, that also burns your opponent, which is like great against Malice, and it's great for time. It gives your deck a going second time option, which is something Branded doesn't have. So I think that's why Gizmek Uka probably should be somewhere within someone's side deck. I do think there's actually some reasons not to run it because of Triple Tactics Talents being in the game, and there's a lot of lines where ryzeal doesn't need to start Ice ryzeal to establish the cross, so this will just be getting crossed at the end of the day. So, you know, this is, you know, your mileage might vary, but I think when you aren't getting talents, I think this is like one of the best things ever. It's also very solid, like I said, into the new Blue Eyes deck. Extraordinarily solid against Blue Eyes, because you get to fuse off the Blue Eyes, and then you have a Mirror Jade, which gets to set you up your end phase effects, because Mirror Jade can then just send a Albion itself if you banish the Albion, so that you can get recursion, or you can send the Titanclad to get the Quem, which is always very good, or like I mentioned, Albion to just get branded fusion, because it can search any branded spell or trap card. So I think that's something that's very good, and something that you should consider if you're running branded. I think even DB Grinder said, like, if you're running branded, you should probably run this card. Also, I did just want to comment on Alba Lenatus, because we were talking about how it's so good against Blue Eyes, but there's obviously a trap in Blue Eyes that lets them basically non-target pop up to multiple cards on their field, depending on how many Blue Eyes they have in rotation. So it's usually 1 or 2. So that can be an issue if you go normal summon Albaz, no effect, and they pop it and they know you're going for the Lenatus. However, I don't think a lot of people will know that off the bat, especially with Branded being a low-key deck, so I think that won't be much of an issue. I think that if you're going game 1, going second, set Albaz first action, your opponent isn't going to go pop it, honestly, because your opponent won't know you're on Branded. For one, it's a rogue deck at this point, so I think that's totally fine to be able to still run this. I think you will get around that trap mostly, and then you can just contact off their whole board. Obviously, they will still have the trap, but like you basically deal with the Spirit Dragon, the Cosmic Quasar, anything like that, which is very good, the Crimson Dragon. So I think that's very good in order to do that. Back to more of the board breaker discussion, you do have Super Poly 2, which we saw in Basili's list for the top 32 YCS Birmingham list. I think Super Poly is very good right now because it cleans up the Malice board super nicely. You can obviously make a Garuru with most of their monsters. Also, Despia and Proskinion is very good right now. So I think that you can fuse off the Mitsurugi Murakamo plus the ryzeal detonator, and then you can make a Proskinion, and then you can steal the detonator, and detonator then can get a pop. Or you can steal the Murakamo, and Murakamo will then board wipe and then rip a card from your opponent. I think I'd prefer the Murakamo in that scenario, personally speaking. But so that's why I think that Super Poly is very broken into that situation, and you should probably be on it. And like I mentioned, Triple Tactics Talents, it's just you can take a monster, and then if you need to go for OTK, which is also very important, like I think everyone needs to be on Despia and Quertus right now. Like I won multiple games today, in fact, just offline playing Quertus. Also, here's Proskinion. This card's broken because, like I said, you can just take the detonator, and detonator on any special summon just attaches, and then like I said, if you're able to just take a Murakamo, it's just crazy because this is just also on special summon. So like having this as a permanent fixture on your board is crazy. That's why I think Proskinion's just nuts right now, because it's a OTK machine, it's a huge body, and then it constantly steals from your opponent's graveyard, right? Like that's crazy. You get to steal, and there's so many good monsters that trigger on special summon at the moment. You can you can take a White Binder, right, against Malice. You can fuse off the you can go normal summon Despia. So this is the line. A lot of people are like, how do you make Proskinion? Well, it's very easy because you just go normal summon a Luber, they chain Imperm, you chain Super Poly, you fuse off their detonator and their Murakamo, you make the Proskinion, and then you just are like, okay, well, I have this now, Proskinion effect, let's take your detonator effect, but it's like way better to take the Murakamo. It's very good against the Mitsurugi deck in particular. I think it can also work against the Fiendsmith deck because they end on Desiree, right? So it does like kind of like the same thing. And also But also in that scenario, you might need to make like a Despia and Quertus, and like I mentioned, Quertus is just so good. You need it. It's also a great way to OTK Maliss because all their monsters are in attack position. So if you're able to play through their board, you're able to OTK with Quertus like 10 times out of 10. Obviously, it's very hard to play through their board, so that's why we're running, you know, these contingency plans, running the draw 2 off of Talons. Like imagine going Talons into Allure, Banish Mercourier, you know, into Shrouded. You're like +5 at that point, right? So it's just, or +4. So it's very good in that scenario. I do think that Branded in white is also a board breaker when you consider things like Cartesia being able to fuse into a little known card called Chaos Star Source Dragon, because this is a pop 2 in basically every scenario you make in Branded outside Super Poly, because you have to use dragons on your side of the field basically, or in your possession essentially, to pop cards. So this will always equate to a pop 2, which you can just make with you can make this with Branded Fusion, right? So you can go into Lubellion, make this pop 2, but I think the more important part is you can go, this makes like Branded in white going second like a pop 2.